Hi, everyone. Sure. So my name is Dr. Petra Jelinek. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Anthropology and work with Dr. Ritchison. However, I'm a biological anthropologist. So what I'm really interested in is the human brain, things like cognitive evolution and primates. So a lot of our behavior in biology is of course linked to our closest living relatives. And although that wasn't specifically part of my dissertation, it is something that I'm deeply interested in.
Yeah, that's awesome, and why you are a fantastic partner in crime for this particular stream. I've, of course, been fooling around with this game a little bit myself, and of course, I have had more than my fair share of both learning and teaching about evolution and paleoanthropology generally. Full disclosure, my dad is a biologist, he is an ornithologist. So he studies birds. It's a little further afield from primates, but I did have a more than a few classes in biology as I just lived in my house as a kid. So I've always found the biological aspect of anthropology to be particularly compelling, even though I found a home in a different subdiscipline. Um, let's see here. Let's go to
So
this
I'm
stream
this is
here.
so interesting. This is so interesting because I am watching the stream and it's a little bit asynchronous. So this is interesting
Yeah, there
to
was going to be
see.
a little bit of a delay, but now we
Yeah.
should be in the game. At least the audio. And I've turned the sound back up, so you should be able to hear it now as well, Petra,
Yes.
I think. We can kind of hang out. It is just now still a little bit before 6 o'clock, so I don't want to go too quickly here. Let's see. I should turn down one of these audio things. For those who are in the stream, who are probably on about a 30-second delay from us, if I had to guess, how is the audio? Always a valuable question to ask if anyone's voice is too loud, too soft, or if the game sound is overpowering. Just please pop it in the chat and let me know if there's any complaints. But what we're in for today is we're going to start a new lineage in this game, and that's going to plop us approximately 10 million years or so in the past. And we're just going to muddle our way through what it was like to be a hominid, um, which should be fun. I'm going to actually put Dr. Jelinek in kind of the driver's seat a little bit here. You're going to be, Petra, making some decisions for
Oh
us.
my. Okay.
I'm going to do my best to carry out these decisions as you make them, and hopefully together we will make one fine hominid. Is my plan.
So this is great because I haven't seen, just so everybody knows, I've only seen a portion of this game, but much later in evolutionary time. So I haven't been able to see what we're going to be entering into right now. I do want to mention, though, that Dr. Richardson is using the term hominid, and I know that all of you know that that term really refers to the great apes as well as ourselves and our ancestors. So that's a very large, a broad term,
Hmm.
and we are all also hominins, which is defined by our bipedal locomotion. So I think that we're going to be looking for some of these characteristics as we move through.
Yes.
But
From the time we briefly spoke yesterday, Petra, I discovered bipedalism, so we do have some actual hominins to potentially talk about towards a little on into the stream. But we will start with hominids. And so to that point, before we jump in and see where the game takes us, what would you expect to see from a member of our evolutionary lineage from about 10 million years ago? Because that's kind of in this time period that's a little before some of our more well-known fossil ancestors, like Sahelanthropus chidensis, which first shows up a little bit after 10 million years ago, between 9 and 7 million years ago, correct?
right, yes. So Sahelanthropus is really it's a putative hominin, right? We're not quite sure whether or not they walked bipedally, but there's some evidence, right? Most notably the hole in the back of the skull.
Yeah, does anyone in the chat know what that term is? I'm sure someone does, but we're gonna wait and see in about 30 seconds if they do or not. Please continue though. Pop quiz is in the chat, right? Gotta.
So about 10 million years ago, and this is what's pretty wonderful, and I'm excited to see, is that we're not quite sure what our ancestors were doing. We know that hominids were apes, and so they didn't have a tail, and most likely they were moving around the trees. So we'll see. I'm just excited to see how they're presenting this. The other thing that's a big question is, since our most recent living relatives, right, are that we're most closely related to, are chimpanzees and gorillas. They walk. Their form of locomotion is quadrupedal, but it's quadrupedal knuckle walking. However, there's this question in terms of our own lineage whether or not the ancestor of gorillas and chimpanzees and humans, right, around 9 or 10 million years ago, were they knuckle walking ancestors, or were they using their hands differently than what we see in the other great apes? So this is going to be fun to see.
Yeah. So as a word of caution for everyone, this is, of course, the game is its own interpretation of what is known from paleoanthropology and evolutionary biology. Certainly, there are gaps in our knowledge of these species, especially this deep in time. And so there is some license that has been taken, both to, of course, turn this into a game that is enjoyable to play, but also to fill in those gaps in a consistent enough way that we can, or at least the game developers can, communicate a constant movement of evolutionary trajectories, right? A continual accumulation of skills and experiences, at least through the game terms. And this is, of course, not exactly how evolution works, to say the least. Especially in terms of the rate of evolutionary change that is depicted here, because it's really gamified. We talked about the difference between gradual evolutionary change and punctuated equilibrium, and it's kind of interesting to think about how this game is a little bit of both of those, and we'll see that as we go. So with some of those caveats, I suppose, out of the way, let's just jump in. I named my first playthrough Tumai, which ended up being appropriate. But we will just... What shall we name our lineage, Petra?
Okay.
On the spot, yeah, I know.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to.
If you're short on ideas,
a mesh between our names, right? So, Jelinek brandonensis.
Yes. Jelinek.
Brandonensis.
Just gonna have to be Branensis.
Branensis.
We don't have Jelinek Branensis. Here we go. We're gonna call this first time, and we will be doing a full HUD, full tutorial here, and we will start with a random gender.
Oh, somebody says name it Big Steve.
Oh, that would. we can headcanon that any given hominid we're playing is named Big Steve, regardless of sex. It doesn't matter.
Of gender.
Well, yes, that's an interesting distinction to talk about, both in terms of anthropology, which we haven't gotten to, but also in terms of how we're treating these species here.
Right. And also, I am very what I just did is very much in line with a lot of paleoanthropologists and perhaps paleontologists, where ego comes first, right? Where people do like to name things after themselves.
Yes.
And places.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. In paleoanthropology, some of the fun names actually go to the individual fossil finds.
Right.
Right. I explained Lucy, which is an obvious one,
yeah.
But a lot of the other names come from the places. In fact, I didn't talk about this much in the lecture videos, but Homo naledi is related to the etymology of rising star, which is the name of the cave that those fossils were found in.
Right.
So there's a lot of fun little etymological things in there, yeah. So use your body senses, mind, and voice to guide your voyages. Dr. Jelinek, are you ready?
I'm ready.
We must advance the species. For those who might play this game, that's a bit of an understatement.
So there's about 30 to 45 second delay here.
Okay, that's good to know.
Because as you're talking to me, this is going to be interesting, because as you're talking to me, I'm watching this. So there'll be a delay and then in how you actually move.
Oh, are you watching the YouTube stream or are you watching it in our Discord channel?
I don't... Oh, yeah.
Oh, did I not go live in Discord again? Give us a second. We can set this up so you have a quicker...
Let's do that.
Yeah. I know. We'll let this cinematic play through in its entirety.
So you need to share your screen with me, right?
Yes, I will do that.
Okay.
But I have to get out of this main window, and I don't want to interrupt this beautiful cinematic.
That's pretty amazing.
It's introducing us to all of the dangers, of which there are many. And in the chat, yes, I did build my own PC. I've built a couple at this point. I've always liked Legos, and I just transitioned that into adulthood by building computers. And still the occasional Lego set, as it comes up.
The skills you learn in childhood.
Yeah, they carry forward.
This is remarkable.
And so we begin. I'm going to quickly pause there. There you go. You should be able to follow along with a little bit more timely response now.
Okay.
Alright, so let's see, did you catch the tail end of that cinematic?
I did.
Okay, so now we're a young adolescent. It wants us to use our intelligence to find a hiding spot. So that's just gonna... There's a lot of gamified ways in which the game tries to emulate the sorts of information that would just be at hand, right? The kinds of interpretations of the senses that these species would have been able to would have used to navigate their environment, to know what these different resources were. So as this baby, I just looked around and tried to find a hiding spot, and now I'm just headed in that direction. You can see that this is a very scary experience for this baby, and now I will hide. Oh, there's some echo.
Alright.
Hang on. Let me pause again and make sure this isn't a little too loud. Turn that down a little bit. And I will also turn the audio output capture down a little. Hopefully this will be a bit better. Alright, so we have now taken control of an adult.
Okay.
I'm gonna get rid of those movement things. So our hominid, yes, is well. You can hear possibly Petra, the young adolescent out there crying in fear, and now we have to go try to find it. You actually see in the bottom right corner that we have this little wheel with dots. And the orange dot in the bottom right is that adolescent who is outside of our little home here, so he's outside of the circle, and he's flashing red because he's in danger. So we need to use our intelligence to try to find him. So hearing would be good, because we have hearing and smelling.
So I can, so if you're using hearing, can you follow that? And are those the sound waves?
Yeah, that's just general ambient sound. I can kind of hear it in my headset with some direction. It seems like it's coming from this direction, but we're really high up, and there's like a limit to how far our senses carry. Oh, there. Okay, so we're gonna remember that spot. And now the real benefit of me having played this game in my free time is that I'm not gonna immediately die every time I try to climb a tree. That was a little touch and go when I first started playing this. I've gotten much better at not breaking tons of bones. What kind of adaptations did the species, these early hominids, including contemporary apes, have to move more readily through like the tree tops and that sort of thing than we have today, or later hominins, for example, had?
Are you asking?
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't expect they're gonna.
So yeah, no, this is.
Oh, now I have to try to comfort this child.
Just for comparison, what we know about contemporary apes are that chimpanzees are about 4 or 5 times stronger than an adult chimpanzee is about 4 or 5 times stronger than an adult man. So they are extremely strong individuals, and so we probably expect the same thing with our ancestors. They also had bifurcated big toes, right? So our big toe is in line with the rest of our toes, and this is a very special adaptation, not just among humans compared with chimps or gorillas, but humans amongst all living mammals, really.
You can kind of see that on this individual here. I'm trying to get a good shot of the feet as he's moving around, but you can see, at least on that left foot there, how splayed out the big toe is. Much more like our hands, like I'm showing from class, right? Opposability, right? Allowing for gripping and grasping.
Exactly. So how we describe that as having grasping hands and feet. And also, probably the way they're portraying this, it looks like their arms are a little bit longer than their legs. And so this is something that we see in other living great ape species, right? Having these relatively long arms compared with their legs. We have the opposite, it's what's called intermembral index. It's the ratio of our arm length to our leg length. And, of course, a big part of that has to do with how they're moving through the trees, that there's a heavy reliance on arm strength and, this incredible dexterity. And it's also a carryover from perhaps, this is another question.
This is a great dexterity demonstration right here.
Yeah, from brachiation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the lesser apes, like the gibbons, they brachiate. They move through the canopy using their really flexible shoulder joints, as well as strong and long arms.
See, I'm trying to find our settlement here. Trying to use my intelligence to remember where they're camped out. So that's what I'm doing, is looking around here. I don't remember. I think they're back in here. Oh, actually, no, they're down here. I overshot. There they are. So we will try to climb down without. Oh, can we grab? Oh, all right. Whew. That was a close call.
You're so good.
So the sociality is really showing here. Everyone is very happy that I've rescued a child and brought it back. I love these small moments that the game gives you that I think speaks to some of the shared sociality in our lineage, right? It's something that makes us potentially special and distinct as hominids and hominins, is our sociality.
Absolutely. This is really, I I wish I could say more. I'm just so engrossed by this game. But one of the things that it is showing as well, when you look at when you're watching the young adolescents, is play and the importance
Mm-hmm.
of play in learning and development. And that is a key component of sociality as well.
So it gave us our first task there. I don't know if you saw that.
I did, but I can't read it.
I'm trying to get that put away. Our first objective. So all the things that are popping up are tutorials, but our objective is to build a sleeping spot. What where do hominids, I guess including apes and chimps today, of course. Every time I say that, that should be included for the class, so I don't keep putting that caveat there. Where do they sleep? How do they sleep?
Yeah, so this is interesting because I saw this a little bit earlier with you, which I was a
Mm-hmm.
bit surprised by. But so chimpanzees and orangutans, and gorillas, they build nests every single night, and so they build a new nest nightly.
Okay.
Gorillas tend to sleep on the ground, whereas chimpanzees and orangs build their nests in trees. And one of the big reasons that they do this, meaning chimps and orangutans, is the belief is that it keeps them away from predators, right?
Mm-hmm.
And gorillas just happen to be of a very large body size, so it's a little bit more difficult for them as a group
Right.
to build nests in trees.
Is this a true statement? I've heard time and again in various anthropological settings that a common experience that people have falling asleep is they'll kind of start themselves awake with this feeling of falling.
Yes.
Is that related? As a leading question that I think I know the answer to. Is that
Wow. So that's so one of the things that we perhaps do a little less well than archaeologists
Uh huh.
is, we tell stories, but probably pretty careful about telling a lot of stories regarding that.
Uh huh. Yeah.
However, I mean, this is starting to sound a little Jungian, right?
Uh huh.
Of where do some of these aspects of our dreams and our innate fears come from? Some of them make complete sense, right? The sensation of falling out of a tree,
Mm-hmm.
is that a remnant from our ancestors?
I mean,
That
yeah, it sounds like it makes a lot of sense just on the face of it, right?
it does absolutely. But the big question, like a biological anthropologist would ask then, well, how do we test that, right?
Well,
Because we're talking now about how do we actually first
mm-hmm.
of all, how do we study dreams? How do we actually do that in a way which is scientific, and then to try to get at the meaning behind those dreams, right? You
Yes,
might have
exactly.
some insight into that as an archaeologist. Is this because this?
We do talk a lot about cognition in the past, or we try to in archaeology, and there are certainly some people that try to do a bit more of that than others. But as with many things in archaeology, as well as in paleoanthropology, um, you have to find the opportunities to talk about that based on the data that becomes available. And so some of the places that I think are most interesting in archaeology that we've talked about cognition is in cave art, for example, where we can actually talk about the neurons in our eyes and our optical nerves and how they act in certain settings, low light, flickering light, the sorts of contexts where you would find yourself in if you were, say, going into a cave with a flickering torch, right? That sort of
Right.
thing. And so there's this category of phenomena called entoptic phenomena, which are the sorts of things that you see if you close your eyes and you rub them kind of hard. You see geometric patterns and the like. And so some of these that are very common are cross-hatching or spirals, triangles, dots, circles. And some people have argued that it's no coincidence that these are some of the patterns that show up in the earliest art, both on specific objects that we find, as well as in cave paintings and the like.
Right.
So that's interesting. If anyone's interested, we can talk a little bit more about that. But we're here for the monkey business. So if we want to make a sleep spot, I say we look pretty chimpanzee-like. That makes me think that we do need to make a nest. Yes.
Yes, we do, but maybe in a tree, and that's where I'm wondering.
Ah,
Um, we need to make one in a tree or on the ground, because chimpanzees would opt for the trees.
would opt for the trees. Well, there's not a lot of trees in our little oasis here, but there is one up there I'm looking at. Potentially we could head up there and see what's going on. Um,
And
what
part of
would
it depends
we...
on,
Go ahead.
sorry, part of it depends on the foliage too that one has around.
Right. For
So
example, this leafy stuff here, does that look like that might be good nesting material?
that looks like it's wonderful.
Good. We'll keep that in mind. We're gonna climb up here, past this beehive, which might sting a little as we go. Just gonna climb up. Let's see. Where was this tree? It's over here. I'm gonna jump down. This is a big jump, but I think we're gonna be fine. So I should note that as this Big Steve here was a recent survivor of a giant eagle, which again there's a whole slew of predators that are around at this time that are no longer around today. So that makes me somewhat nervous about potentially putting a bed up here. Feels
Yeah.
what I know about raptors that this wouldn't be great.
No,
Maybe we should keep our eyes open on a new settlement, but for the sake of progress, we should just try to build a bed. I think someone might need a nap, just generally. This has been a very stressful day so far as I can tell.
and that is something that chimpanzees do. They do spend some amount of time resting, right? This is
Mm-hmm.
when primatologists measure, they do things called they measure the activity patterns of the primates that they're studying, and so they'll literally calculate how much time, what percentage of time they spent, let's say, eating, foraging, moving from place to place, so traveling as well as resting. And they tend to be relatively consistent, meaning within a species, you tend to see a relative amount of consistency in terms of how much time they do each of those things.
Mm. How do those patterns of the way, say, chimps spend time compare to how we spend time?
That's a great question, and part of that is it can be a little challenging to compare chimps to, let's say, people living in Western societies, because we
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily carry the same activity patterns, right, as what a hunter-gatherer or even pastoralist group might engage in. But there is, you know, so hunter-gatherers seem to, in some ways, perhaps mimic a little bit more of what we might see in chimps. But at the same time, one of the things that humans are really good at is acquiring highly nutritious food types. And we also consume more calories than many of our counterparts. We eat these very rich in protein food types, rich in nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we also do is that we actually travel a fair amount. Like we move a lot relative to relative to our closest living relatives. So we do, but we also do that very efficiently. Like we are pretty efficient bipedal walkers, right? Compared to chimps, even if we look at the energy expenditure
Yeah.
of them walking quadrupedally.
Let's see. I don't even know if I can make this individual stand up and try to walk. Um, that comes later as we do a little bit of evolution. So our current objective now, we've built a nice sleeping spot here. I think I'll take the opportunity to put down these kids I've been piggybacking. Is to form a couple. So how does a hominid today form a couple? How does say, who are we? We are two, and a single adult male. How would I go about attracting a mate?
Well, compared with today, is this one coming? If you're
Who is
question.
this? Let's see. Who is this? This is another adult male.
Uh, well, you could still groom, right? I mean, there's some
Oh
of
yeah,
the
we
things
can
that
do some social behavior.
yeah,
Oh,
you
he
can
didn't.
groom.
I didn't do a good job grooming though. So we can form a couple. There might be some biological limitations to how successful we are at reproducing, but these sorts of behaviors are what bind together an entire troop,
Yes.
right? I'm doing a really
Yeah.
poor job because I'm talking at the same time.
And this is really important because especially when we look at these groups, like you had mentioned earlier, what we've been talking about is the importance of sociality, right? And how the social organization and the social interactions is really important in, again, maintaining this group structure. And even if, even though these are two males bonding, those relationships in chimpanzees that are living today, those male alliances are really important in rank, in social
Mm.
rank.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a male and you happen to be friends with several other males, and you then might be interested in vying for that alpha male status, you have a few other males that are likely going to stand behind you because it will raise their rank as well. And then there are certainly a lot of benefits that come along with that. Oh, is this a meteor?
This is a meteor. There's some nods to 2001 in here that I find amusing. If anyone knows 2001 Space Odyssey, it has a very, very famous and very incorrect depiction of human evolution in it. That I believe the meteors in this game are a nod to, in a loose sense.
And perhaps even a nod to, well, a nod to 2001, but also thinking about the evolution of spirituality.
Ah, yes. If we're going to go Jungian again, yes. Talk about some of these experiences in the deep past that may have affected our cognition and its development.
Right, trying to understand the world. I mean, literally, it just comes down to trying to understand the
Mm-hmm.
world around you, um, and the
So
many forms that that takes.
there's a couple things in the chat. Someone asked, "Would a giant eagle be able to carry a chimp?" And the answer is yes. There is a lot of evidence that some of these very large raptors were predating primates. There's some fossil evidence for that, if I recall, although I can't speak to any specifics off the top of my head. There are rock shelters and caves and other places where there's pretty good preservation where we're finding fossils. In fact, in some of the caves in South Africa where we find a lot of hominid fossils, it's hotly debated in some cases as to whether or not those fossil finds are evidence of ritualized disposal by other members of the hominid species, or, as seems quite likely and common because there is evidence for it, that these were in fact basically places where hyenas or lions or the megafaunal equivalents of these species would drag poor hunted hominids back to eat or to maybe store for later. There's some quite compelling fossil examples of some hominids that have matching skull perforations that like match perfectly with other fossils of predators that were alive at the same time.
Right,
So
right.
all of these things together.
Yes, especially cats,
Yes.
which is and you're bringing up something really interesting too. Is how, and this is something you see in archaeology, right? How do you um, taphonomically, and that's the term that we use to describe putting together the site and figuring out what might have actually happened,
Mm-hmm.
right? So looking at bones, and they may have these cut marks on them or scratch marks, and paleoanthropologists can figure out, sometimes with certainty and sometimes with a certain degree of ambiguity, whether those marks are from, let's say, tooth marks or claw marks, or their bite marks, or if they were made from a stone tool. And so there's this really interesting find about 3.3 million years ago where a lot of paleoanthropologists argue, hey, this is the evidence of first stone tool use. But some other paleoanthropologists say, you know what, this isn't really a tool. We think that this is more likely to be an animal.
Ah, yeah. No, I mean that still happens today. There's hotly debated in archaeology. It's the same question A lot of evidence for early peopling of the Americas, for example, has been based on just lithic artifacts, just stone tools. And there's always a question in certain contexts as to whether or not a tool was made by a person, or natural geological processes, or predation, could be, that sort of thing. Gnaw marks, are they gnaw marks from, say, scavenging rodents, or are they cut marks from humans who are using relatively rough stone tools or something like that? So I decided it was probably a better idea as the hominid that I am to not wander out into the jungle in the middle of the night. So I decided to sleep. And now I think I'm pretty hungry and thirsty as far as I can tell. So we're going to take some time to see to our basic needs. But I have to inspect this water. It's the first time I've ever drank any water. Because, again, this is a gamified experience. I'm pretty sure that this individual, Big Steve, has eaten most of the things that are around here. And you also see that occasionally, as I'm carrying out activities, this little pop-up comes up in kind of the right-hand screen that says matured neuron of different types. So this could be a kind of a longer conversation, but let's talk a little bit to start about what the game intends, like how it frames neuronal development. So as we lie down, we can go into our evolution menu. This is where a lot of this game happens. And so this is, I will explain it to you instead of having you guys read that. As we wander around and do activities, specifically as the young babies or the adolescents in the group are watching us do various activities, we're developing neuronal energy. Again, this is kind of the game explanation. That we can then spend on different skills, which are meant to mirror different kinds of evolutionary developments, right? So, for example, let's start up here. This is a motricity neuron. So we have basic motor skills. So we now have the ability to switch hands. So not only can we hold things in our right hand, we can switch things to our left hand. These sort of things that we take for granted, but a lot of animals, even if they technically have the capability, for opposability, don't really have the fine motor control to do some of this sort of object manipulation, right?
So let me interrupt here because I think
Sure.
that's really interesting.
And feel free to correct me at any point. You're the expert here. I'm just the pilot.
No, this is great because, well, first of all, I know that you're going to continue talking about the neuronal component.
Kinesics. We talked about that in class, didn't we, everyone?
Is this idea that that through learning, right, that you can start to manipulate tools.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that researchers can do in looking at stone tools of hominins, so our more recent ancestors, is that you can tell if an individual was right or left-handed, the ones who made that tool. And the vast majority of those tools were right-handed. That being said, when we look at or when we observe chimpanzees using tools, they tend to use those tools with both hands relatively equally. But of course, they don't have, for some there might be a slight favoritism towards one or the other, but we don't see that 80-20. I think that's what we have.
Yeah, I've heard. I think it's somewhere around 10 to 15% of left-handed people in the population.
Right. So let's say 85 to 90 then percent right-handed. We do not see those same numbers in chimps. But I think what this does is it gets at that point of being able to manipulate things in a more dexterous way.
So we're just taking care of some basic needs again. You see that it started raining, which has now made our Big Steve here pretty cold. And so in all of my gameplay that I've done, I'm going to jump ahead and find there's a plant, which I do not know what it's called. We will learn here in a second. I can identify it by what it looks like, just like a proper hominid could, I suppose. They tend to grow up on rocky outcrops, like up here, and it keeps you from being cold. Again, another gamification of the system of managing these like different status effects and stuff, but it will make the gameplay a little easier if we're just playing by the rules as instituted by the game. So we have to, after I do this, Petra, I'm going to put you kind of back in the driver's seat and see if you can point us in the right direction to go find that meteor.
Oh my. Okay.
So we're up here. What would you like to do first? We have our senses, we have our intelligence, and we know we were. It kind of went in this general direction, I think, that I'm facing
Right.
here.
So is this a cliff that we can climb
Yes, we
down?
can climb down this cliff. We might try to find a slightly better route down than this, maybe
So
down there.
so I'm not sure if the senses are going to help quite as much, but the intelligence certainly. So that would be memory. Unless there could be a smelling component.
Oh, maybe. It would also limit us based on the range, so let's
Yeah.
see what we can smell down there on the
Right.
floor. So that's something new. We don't know what a lot of things are yet, because, of course, we as the player have not explored here. So we're going to have to discover some things as we go, try out these different fruits and the like. But I think we should probably make our way down so that our senses can help us find our way. I think we're a little probably too far away to do much. Up here. So we'll head down, and we're gonna take babies with us. How frequently do like modern chimps, for example, like under what conditions do they take young with them? Like how frequently are they always
Yeah.
like if there are
So
these excursions out of kind of a home territory? Like how what in what situations would adolescents accompany adults?
yeah. So this is that's a great question. So what I think actually is neat about this, and again, this is another gamification element, is that usually males are not the ones carrying the offspring,
Mm.
right? It's the vast majority of time it's going to be the female with offspring, and females will be very offspring will be with females basically all of the time. But the transitions that you see are when they're first born, the mother will carry the infant close to her chest. And chimps develop dexterity much more quickly than humans. And so around 6 months, they're able to around six to 12 months, they're able to then hang on and climb onto the back, and so for about a period of until around age 3 or 4 they're actually still nursing. So they get weaned around age 3 to 4, and then they're considered to be a juvenile. But at that time they're still with the mom. They'll venture off on their own a bit, and I think that will be a little bit more similar to what we saw at the very beginning, but they're still moving in relatively close proximity to the mother. So yes, this is very common.
Just kind of investigating different things as I move around. Let's go see what that is. What have we found here? A fishing spot. Seems
Ah,
like it's a little out of our reach at this moment. So, chimpanzees, of course, are omnivorous. They consume other animal flesh.
mhm.
What kinds of animals do they consume, and under what kind of conditions do they eat meat?
Yeah. So what's really interesting about chimps, like you mentioned, they're omnivores, which we are as well, and there's a good chance that that this particular individual might have been an omnivore, or in all likelihood they were.
Mm-hmm.
They eat the so their main source of food, of course, happen to be fruits, as like figs and other fruits that are in the forest. They also eat a lot of leaves. They'll eat leaves that are in the trees, but mostly leaves that are on the ground, that are called terrestrial herbaceous vegetation. And those kinds of leaves tend to have a relatively high protein content. Sometimes they eat them after they've had another meal, kind of to finish things off, just like we might have something at the end of our meal.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also eat a lot of insects. So insectivory is something that we might think is disgusting in our country. We tend not to eat too many insects on purpose.
Uh-oh, we're on high
However, there are a
alert.
lot of cultures around the world that obviously do. But chimps are really adept and they enjoy them. And so they engage in termite fishing and ant fishing. And
Snake
then
down there.
and then chimps
Oh,
also
let's climb
eat,
up.
they
Nope,
engage
climb up.
in different kinds of hunting. So males will often go in these organized forays and hunt together in groups. And they have these, they can have some really interesting technique around hunting, meaning if they come across one of their favorite foods is colobus monkey,
Mm.
and they'll have several of the chimps of males might be at the forefront of a chimp of a colobus group, and then there'll be a few chimps in the rear, and so they basically blockade their path. And then once they've caught a monkey, they, it's usually the male who catches it might be eating the most, or the alpha male, even if he's not the one who caught the primate. But they do engage in sharing, and so
Mm.
they'll share the meat that they've just killed. Um, it's also been relatively recently, maybe about 10 years ago or so. Um, Jill Preetz, who actually used to be a graduate student in our department at the U of I, she discovered in Senegal, she observed her chimpanzees that she has been observing for a long time now.
Mm-hmm.
She observed the females actually uh, making spears. So basically taking a stick and taking all the leaves off. So honing the tip by biting it a little bit to sharpen it. And then these females would go up into these basically dead trees where there was a hollow and take the spear and jab down into that hollow. And what they're hunting literally are bush babies.
Oh,
So that's one of the really interesting things that's been discovered. And the other interesting thing is that, of course, it's the females that are the main ones
they're doing that.
engaging in this activity. And
That's
then
really
also
interesting.
they do they will eat fish, but at a lesser frequency. One of the things that they do like to eat that's in the water is algae.
Ah,
So
well, in the coming years, we and chimps may rediscover a commonality, because I have a feeling that algae farms are something that we might need to get more used to the idea of, as we both need to sequester more carbon, create biofuels, and algae has a lot of positive nutritional values, or can. Enough people eat nutritional yeast, it's not all that different, I suppose, than algae, right? I like nutritional yeast quite a bit. Let's see. We've gone quite a ways. We don't have a ton of day left. But I think we can probably head in that general direction. I've just been discovering things on the way, so there's some like tree fibers here, which might come in handy in the future. That was a very heroic jump. I'm being a little casual with my control of Big Steve.
You're very strong.
Yeah, and if you're trying to land on four legs, like you have four appendages, you can absorb that shock, I think, a little more efficiently than us bipeds can if we're trying to land from a high drop. Let's see. I like climbing up a tree a bit of a ways, right, to get a better vantage point. It's also safer to be up here. We already saw that green mamba that I very luckily was able to scare away by myself. I previously have not had a ton of success of intimidating other creatures as a lone individual hominid of some description here. I assume that this species, which goes unnamed, after a while you evolve into a species that doesn't look very different from this, but they call it, that would be Sahelanthropus chidensis is the first one that is named. Does this look to you like completely reasonable, Dr. Jelinek, as like some kind of relative of us and potentially chimps, maybe shortly after a split or around that time?
It does actually. I mean, this definitely fits with what we can surmise, right? So the most parsimonious explanation based on some of the evidence we have would suggest this. Um, so I'm sure that you've talked to your class about that, about how how useful the comparative method is, and that so much of what we can try to guesstimate, right, based on our ancestors, is based on looking at, let's say, living primates, and then their behaviors and how those behaviors might correspond with literally their anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
And then extrapolating back in time, if you have like Sahelanthropus, we have very little fossil evidence for it, but
Mm-hmm.
it gives us enough to tell us that whether it was on the direct line to us, it was still within this. We were not sure, but we still think that it was within this grouping, right? This grouping of ancestors, and so in many ways, it fits in with what we think we know.
I found while we were wandering around some very telling smoke, as well as this giant African rock python, which is just horrifyingly large, uh, in my opinion. So we're going to try to stay up in the trees as we make our way over. I don't know how successful I'll be at that. I'm going to do my best.
Think about if somebody dropped us in the forest and we didn't really have any tools, we wouldn't survive very long.
No, probably not. A lot of our adaptive advantages have accumulated over time. We've kind of certainly not hijacked natural selection, but kind of jumped nature in terms of what culture gives us today. In terms of our communication, shared knowledge, the consistent accumulation of that knowledge that can be transmitted across, at this point, to a greater or lesser extent, thousands of generations. So this seems like a dangerous place. Okay, so here's another game. We are afraid of a game thing. We are afraid of the unknown. So we have to conquer our fear. You will note that there is a little bar on the bottom right that's flashing. That is, this giant ball. This is how we get out of this situation if we want to. But I want to conquer our fear. This is our dopamine level, which is going down. So I need to try to rationalize, by using my intelligence and my senses, something about my surroundings, so I don't go into a complete panic. So we're just going to spend some time just looking around. Don't know what that is.
Panicked before?
I definitely have panicked, and I think we might be heading that direction, because we need to identify things that I know what they are, and it seems like there's a bunch of things here that I have yet to identify well, which kind of limits, but we're almost there. You can see there's that little circular bar next to the eye that's filling up. So we've conquered our fear. This is another just a gameplay mechanic. And now you see all these little trailing white lights. We have to make our way. And hopefully, I just feel like there's tons of predators around. Ugh, let's get through this swamp. Let's climb out. We have to make our way to this bright glowing orb, which will allow us to have conquered our fear. And then we can explore this area with a little more impunity. Our clan is now more confident in a wider territory. So while we're out here exploring, our clan members are out there kind of living their lives as well. They don't range as far as a field as we, the player, hominid, does. But they'll take care of their daily needs. They'll go eat and drink. You can bring them with you, and eventually we can get to a point where we can more effectively communicate as a group. They can mimic the sorts of activities I do. I don't know if anyone was paying attention earlier, but when I was eating those leaves, the other members of my clan saw that I was eating those leaves, and they decided to also eat leaves. So you can kind of help them help themselves as the player here. It's kind of the conceit. Is this it? I saw... I've lost that smoke. I maybe need to go back to underground level. The foliage obfuscates. And I've gotten cold again because the leaves wore out and it started raining. Where? Oh, where? Am I right here? Oh, it's right here. Oh, there's also a warthog over there. Oh, and that snake. Maybe if we're lucky, that snake will get that warthog. We can go and watch. There we go. Ah, you love it when two of your antagonists take care of each other.
You don't have to worry so much.
Yeah. Hopefully that snake is occupied, full of warthog. Let us inspect this meteor while we have a free moment. We can run away. It's already kind of at night here, so probably don't want to be out and about. To what degree, if any, are there any nocturnal hominids, or have there ever been any nocturnal hominids? Seems kind of like no, but I was wondering if there might be fringe examples, maybe pre-hominids outside of... We spent some time in class, of course, talking about prosimians, which did tend to be... there's a lot of nocturnal adaptations amongst prosimians, especially in the past, even if we have a lot of like diurnal lemurs and the like today.
Right. So that's a great question. Really, all of the nocturnal primates are prosimian. Well, they're strepsirrhines, including.
Oh, that was narrow. We're being followed by a crocodile.
There. Yeah.
I assume it's a croc. I don't know if I can distinguish between crocs. There are not alligators in Africa, correct? I know you're not a you're not a herpetologist, you're a primatologist, so maybe an unfair question.
But I think it's the crocodile. Students pipe in.
Yeah, if anyone's taking herpetology classes. Okay.
Together in Africa. So, however,
This croc is uninterested in my intimidation, so we're just gonna climb.
there's no evidence to suggest that any hominids were nocturnal. Prosimians, of course, we have living examples like bush babies and lorises, and, the ii, which is a very weird primate. And then there's one South American example, which is a New World primate, and that's the Aotus, or night monkey. And that's really it when we're talking about nocturnality. But like you mentioned, we certainly believe, our ancestors,
Oh no.
even pre-primates, were likely nocturnal. And you can see evidence of this nocturnality in fossils, right? The size of the orbits and whatnot.
Yeah, I shared. I don't know if anyone in the chat watched the video I shared, but there is a fun kind of comedy satirical nature show on YouTube called True Facts, and one of my favorites is about tarsiers. Yeah. Throughout the entire video, he pronounces it Tarsier, which doesn't get old. I hope they watch that. Tarsiers are one of those examples of one of those relatively rare nocturnal species.
And what's really interesting about tarsiers, now that you bring them up, is that they're nocturnal, and one of the reasons they're prosimians but not strepsirrhines. So we think that they split off from those strepsirrhines like lemurs and lorises, is because they share some trait with other higher primates. But one of the reasons that we thought initially that they were, that they belonged with that other group is because they're nocturnal. But they have what's called secondary nocturnality, meaning that there was a place in between there that they were likely diurnal, or their ancestors were. And the reason that we believe this is that their LCN, which is part of the brain, basically is the part of the brain where information from your eyes goes to your brain, and that differs in tarsiers compared with the other strepsirrhines.
Oh, that's interesting.
Also, their orbits are huge. Nocturnal animals tend to have relatively large eyes, but theirs are actually extra large, and each eyeball of a tarsier is as large or larger than its brain.
I don't think I realized that fun little tidbit. This game makes no apologies for it being really hard to see and navigate at night, because you shouldn't be out here at night. This was my mistake. I didn't really manage my time particularly well. I could have found and made a sleeping spot, I suppose, or just camped out up in the trees and waited for some time to pass. That is totally a reasonable strategy as far as the game is concerned, because there's really no benefits to sleeping at your settlement versus anywhere. You can only do certain things at your settlement, like, or on a sleeping spot in particular. But I decided to just kind of power through since we weren't that far and away. But we discovered this meteorite, which, oh my god, did I not inspect that meteorite? I thought I did. I thought I got that. Oh my goodness. Well, we might be making another excursion tomorrow. Or we could just explore and do some other things. We don't have to follow these guidelines particularly closely, because I kind of know some of the things that we should be doing. Such as adding to our clan size. We've got a total of us that we're piloting right now. Big Steve, also known as 2. But we have 2 offspring and like 5 adults. We can see that in our little icon, our little mini wheel down there in the bottom corner that depicts our clan. But I think it's probably
Orange ones, are they?
the,
Just the 2 little ones?
yes.
Are they offspring?
Yes, those orange individuals have beneficial mutations that we would like to try to preserve into the next generation. So let's actually spend some time in the evolution. We've unlocked a few more skills just by doing again. So we've unlocked orthostasis and senses, so we can detect more distant things as we stand up and look around now.
Do you know what orthostasis is?
I do not. I was hoping you would.
I don't know what it is.
Contextual orthostasis. I think that there are some places where this game has chosen the most scientific word for something that actually doesn't need jargon, just to make it fit the overall aesthetic of the evolution stuff. Orthostasis makes me think something to do with our skeletons, right? And being still. I'm not positive there.
Yeah.
My wife is the classicist. She learned Latin and Greek. I did not.
Yeah,
Also, what about equilibrioception? Is that a term you're familiar with?
That is not, but it's not that it's not used. But orthostasis, I just looked it up.
Okay.
It's defined as a normal physiological response of the sympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
To counteract a fall in blood pressure when a person is lying down and then assumes the upright position. So.
Oh, I could stand to have better orthostatic responses then, because it's far too often that I stand up really fast and feel lightheaded.
Yeah. So I think this is referring to some of these benefits that are going to lead to bipedalism, right? That are going to
Right.
Make bipedalism possible.
Right. So we have increased perception now, and that was one of the skills here. We had that equilibrioception, which I assume has to do with our own perception of balance to a certain degree, which now lets our hominids stand upright at will to walk a tiny bit. So I guess this is a question, I don't remember if I asked this, but something I wanted to, is what contexts do we see apes today moving bipedally, even if it is very limited? Like, when do they stand up on 2 legs? Because they have a limited capacity to some extent, all of the apes, or at least the greater apes. I don't know about the lesser apes.
Yeah. So, great apes walk upright sometimes. They're considered to be facultative bipeds, meaning that they can do it, and they do engage in that behavior. And we as humans, we're obligate bipeds, so this is how we move. But they do, it can vary among uh, well, for example, chimpanzees and bonobos actually walk upright a little bit more frequently than chimpanzees do. And if you haven't really talked much about bonobos and chimps are closely related to one another. They belong to the same genus. Um, but they tend to walk upright when they are carrying objects, of all things.
Hmm.
So they'll walk upright when, let's say, they're carrying food, maybe even when they're carrying offspring, but it's usually when they're carrying food. There have been a couple times where they've been observed to walk upright, and I'm thinking actually about a gorilla example where they took a stick. This gorilla was observed to take a stick and almost use it as a cane to cross over some water.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
swampy or like kind of a stream region.
Hmm.
And so again, there are these interesting contexts in which they do stand upright. I've also seen chimps stand upright when they're trying to look. When they're trying to look in the distance, like
That
they
stands to
start.
reason. That is something we can do now, and we can stand up. You can walk a little bit because we got that, and that does, in terms of the game, give us a little more distance on our senses and intelligence. So it's exactly what you were saying. The game also does a good job of when chimps cross water that's walkable, they will stand up like this, and as you'll see down there in the corner, that we're creating neuronal energy by practicing walking on two legs in this context, which is another
So
game related.
what you and I had talked about how what a good job this game has done in incorporating research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's gamified, but incorporating the science into this game. And one of the things that I didn't see last time that I just wanted to mention here was,
Mm-hmm.
we were talking about equilibrioception and
Mm-hmm.
sort of this orthograde posture. But what they're getting at, and I think what they're pointing at a little bit, is that we've learned that humans, compared with, let's say, chimps and bonobos, our semicircular canals inside of our ears are actually differently oriented, right?
Mm.
And that orientation is related, of course, to how we move, and the fact that we stand upright and move in this upright posture. And one of the things I mentioned earlier, that bonobos actually spend a little bit more time walking upright than chimps. They've also noticed that these semicircular canals in bonobos are a little bit more human-like compared with chimps. And so,
Oh, that's interesting.
and again, this game is just really incorporating some of these um, neat ideas that people have actually researched.
Okay, so the chat, Dr. Jelinek is joining virtually, but I'll see what I can do to make her a little louder for you. Can you say something again, Petra?
Let's see. Can you hear me now?
Hopefully that will be a little bit better.
It might take a few minutes or a few seconds.
Right, for them to catch up. So I've climbed up here, and oh goodness, whew, that was close. And I've got this palm frond, and so this is something I showed you a little yesterday. Is one of the contexts for the earliest crafting. So that was actually not particularly successful, which this game does because it's a lot of trial and error. But what are some occasions that chimps have been documented in using tools besides the hunting example that you talked about a little earlier?
Yeah, so we know that they fashion spears. They also use things like sticks for and grass, really, for termite fishing and ant fishing, and they're very adept at that. And that's what this individual is doing right here. Most likely, is using uh, stripping this particular object and going to use it for something.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm still a little hungry this morning, right? So I got up and got some drinks, and I was thinking that there is this beehive up here,
ah,
and that seems really tasty. So I got some
yeah.
fruit, but the call of the honey I could not avoid. So I've created this little dipstick here from some of the same plant that we used to make our bed with, actually, by stripping the leaves off. and we are going to inspect this beehive first because it's scary and new, but now we know that it is a beehive. Now we can dip our little dipper stick in there, grab some honey, and then see what we've learned. Go check it out. Seems good. We're just gonna have some meat. And I like that the young on your back reaches over and tries to snag anything you're eating. It doesn't matter what it is. They just reach over and they want some.
I
Oh,
want it.
yep. Oh, I'm getting stung. Whew. All right. Just having some delicious honey for breakfast.
Wow, so this is advanced problem solving. Is this a new thing that you've acquired?
Yes, I'm a leading tool user. I've used this vegetal thing as a dipstick. And the point of the game is that you are supposed to drive evolution forward as the player. And so as we go through different evolutionary stages, which I'll show you all before too long here, it gives you a readout of estimates of like how far along the evolutionary timeline you've come, and it gives you a read on how far ahead of science you are. And I don't really know how they calculate that. I assume that they've just done some flatline averaging between dated species to try to figure out how much time is in between. And so that's definitely a gamification, but I find it really satisfying that the game has told me that I'm like 250,000 years ahead of science. It's probably the furthest ahead in any scientific field I'm ever going to be. 250,000 years. Alright, let's see if we can go back and re-find more efficiently, now that we know where it is, that meteorite at least. Just because exploring is good, we have to learn, you know, some more things. But we'll probably, again, want to expand our clan next. So one way to do that is, of course, is having offspring. But how do primates today, like how is group affiliation determined? How is it flexible? Right? How do chimps know who is a part of the in group, who is a part of the out group? Right.
Right. Well, so chimps are, each species that one might be talking about is its own special case, right?
Yes. Especially because you brought up bonobos, so I didn't talk in depth about some of these different social behaviors amongst the great apes. Not the least of which is entertaining as chimps and bonobos.
Right.
So you get to do this off the cuff.
So chimpanzees, they live in relatively large groups. And they can live in smaller groups too, perhaps similar to the size here, but they do benefit by having a few more individuals because it does offer a bit more protection. Chimpanzees are very territorial, and they have been known to basically go on patrol and kill other chimpanzees that might be crossing over into their territory. So they have this level of aggression that, when it was first observed, it really surprised researchers. That being said, you're asking about sort of this group structure.
Mm-hmm.
And so so the big thing that determines group structure are one is the kind of foods that are eaten. So chimps are omnivores, but they do eat a lot of fruits and whatnot. But the other thing that...
What about mushrooms? Because I've just found some here.
They do. And I think that this particular video might be capitalizing on that a little bit. They do eat fungi, but they might not eat it quite as much as this the video is portraying.
Yeah, maybe not.
Eat it. That being said, just like humans, I mean, maybe you know more about this, but people still aren't quite sure what the nutritional benefit is of mushrooms. But there is some, it's just very difficult to measure. Do you have any sense?
I actually do not have any. I think that's really, oh gosh, there's a crocodile. He's on the move somewhere. Or maybe I'm hallucinating because I just had a bunch of mushrooms.
No, maybe, but
no, we just cleared that. Oh, no, he's after me. Oh, there's the snake. Can I somehow get these animals to fight? This is basically just a greatest fictional animal fights simulator in one perspective. So there's this croc down here. There's the snake over here. Come on, snake. Come on. Greatest animal fights. I actually have not been this successful at making animals fight each other in my previous experience. This is actually quite kind of silly, but I'm pleased we've got to do it because, one, we discovered Thorbjarnarsson's crocodile. That's definitely a fossil species with a name like that.
Yes.
Danish paleontologist, no doubt. Oh, and he's right down there next to that rock that I didn't pick up, like a failure of a hominid. Let me get rid of this little dipper stick. I don't need it anymore. Let's see. Did they... The snake and the crocodile are both gone from the immediate vicinity here. So I don't know if anyone's noticed. There's a crocodile down there, which I'll have to avoid. But people were noticing that I'm sick to my stomach, and the music's a little weird, and my vision's a little hazy, and that's because I ate those mushrooms, which were not good for me at this point in my... I'm not omnivorous enough, according to the game. But I think it's interesting that you pointed out that... I'm just going to inspect this random rock while we're talking. That this species was probably already pretty omnivorous at about 10 million years ago.
And meat, the thing is that meat is difficult to, or protein can be difficult to acquire, and I think that's one of the things also that this game is showing is that to acquire meat as a primate, it does, for a large-bodied primate, I should say, it does require a bit of intelligence, right? It requires a certain amount of problem-solving skills because they're large-bodied, so to, let's say, eat enough termites or ants in order to get anything out of it, they're going to have to do more than just scoop them up with their hands, right?
Yes.
And then
Got to make it worth the while. A good return on the investment, right, in terms of time and energy.
And then the same thing with some of these other food types, like if they're going to catch a relatively large-bodied animal, they have to use some skill.
Oh, there's a friend for us down there, maybe. Our next task, as set by the game, is to befriend an outsider. So what we have to do, as far as the game is concerned, is find out what this individual needs. And based on my previous experience, this individual needs some coconut. And the reason that they need coconut is because they are either somewhat poisoned or dehydrated. And we haven't even gotten so far as to get into a coconut. But let's see if we can't do some problem solving here. We have this meteorite, which last I checked is basically a rock. So let's see if we can't find like a palm around. See if we can't get... In this very dense forest, there aren't that many trees with coconuts, actually. That's something that's interesting in the game, is this is actually one very large connected map that you see there. I'm not there yet, but there's supposed to be a savanna out there, and it's all connected. I've largely been in the jungle and then in kind of a lighter forest. While it's one connected map, as you progress through it, it's not entirely... inaccurate to conceive of your movement through these different environments as more dependent on time than just as you're moving through the map, right? Because we talked in class about how environmental change was probably the primary driving force of some of the adaptations for bipedalism that we see, which is a matter of locomoting through different environments. Oh. Wow. Oh no, gosh. I thought I was celebrating because I didn't break a leg. And I landed right in front of a giant warthog, who is very angry at me for existing. It's not like a warthog wants to eat me, they're just highly territorial. I say this from experience. This is real practical archaeological... Oh no, there's a snake or something too. Climb, climb, climb. I hear it. I don't know if you guys can. Oh, that's that same snake. I have to remember the snake is always here. I forgot. It's getting pretty late. We're just gonna climb this tree and we're gonna take a nap. I don't feel like trying to navigate my way through the dark jungle any further. But while we're up here, can we find... There's all this... These are all kapok trees. And they have all this fiber, which, as far as the game is concerned, again, is really useful that you can staunch bleeding. If you get lacerations because you cut yourself, or some kind of predator has unsuccessfully eaten you and you're just left wounded, you can staunch your bleeding with these fibers. One of the things that's really interesting in the game, and because it's modeled after a survival game, just generally, which is a very popular genre, is that there are all of these ways which you can manipulate your health and status, in terms of, again, be a little more resistant to breaking bones, a little harder to detect by predators and the like. But in terms of, I don't know what the right word here is, but maybe preventative medicine is what the game talks about it as. Are there any examples in your mind, Petra, of interesting uses of plants or other materials to kind of take care of themselves amongst primates, outside of us, of course?
Right. So, so anything like taking a plant to staunch a bleeding region, I actually personally don't know of an example like that. But I do know that primates in general do have, and not just chimps, right? So other primates do have a working knowledge of certain plants in their environment that are not necessarily eaten for nutritional value.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll use these plants for various reasons, and they're considered to be medicinal because, again, it's non-nutritive.
Right.
So they'll do things like eat certain plants to help with infections, like namely parasites. And so they'll eat things that are anti-helminth related, and so they self-medicate. They'll also use, this isn't really medicinal, but they'll use leaves or plants to take things off of their body, right? So they like dirt and sperm and other things like that, or semen. And then so I think what's really interesting is this knowledge of plants. I've also read that there have been instances where primatologists have recorded in certain plants that might actually have abortive, or might actually reduce the chance of getting pregnant, right? So I think that those kinds of things are really fascinating, that there is a sense that they know about what these plants can do, and how much of that is learned or passed on is really kind of the magical question, right? Especially when they're not eaten all the time, they're eaten under very special circumstances.
That's fascinating. I didn't realize there was so much of that behavior going on, actually. Kind of thought you might have a few fun examples, but that's actually much deeper usage of those sorts of things than I was expecting.
Yeah.
So we've come back to our settlement again, just because it's nighttime, very hard to navigate. We're going to have to see, I don't know if I can, at this point, help that individual that we found in the jungle, because if we can help them, they'll want to join our clan. I think, I don't know how accurate that is historically, but of course altruism is an important element in recruiting group members in human societies. Right, and so there's this larger question in kind of evolutionary biology, I think, about the evolutionary fitness of altruism, right? I mean, some may have heard, or some students may have heard of the Selfish Gene being a really popular book. Is that Richard Dawkins? Petra, do you know?
Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
So he wrote Selfish Gene and Phenotype.
Mm-hmm. It basically defends the idea, but then there's all these other ideas. One of my in evolutionary biology about how some of our unique sociality does potentially have very quantitative, to say, evolutionary, helps us evolutionarily in very, very measurable ways. And one of the ones I like is the grandmother hypothesis.
Yes, yes.
Would you want to give them a rundown of that while I try to recruit a friend to join our clan?
Absolutely. So this runs into the area of uh, biological anthropology or biology in general called life history. And so, and you might have talked about this with your students as well.
I've
But
mentioned it in a couple offhand discussions, but we didn't spend time on it in any course content directly, so please elaborate.
yeah, so life history really refers to uh, those traits that are really important in the lifespan of an individual, notably at what age is an individual weaned, how long is gestation, at what age do they become juveniles, at what age do they reach sexual maturity, and then of course once upon reaching sexual maturity through adulthood, how many offspring do they have? What's the spacing? What's the birth spacing of those offspring?
Mm-hmm.
And then when do they die, right? And so all of those things are those events. There's timing involved, and they can be under intense selective pressure because those different periods, of course, are linked to, especially in higher primates, are linked to learning, right? So if you have a longer childhood, really what that means is that you have this longer period for growth and development, that you're also reliant on a parent to help you survive and acquire food and whatnot.
Right.
And so one of the unique characteristics about humans is that we live a long time, and that uh, females and males females in particular, live past the point of reproductive age, which is a weird thing because when you're talking about animals, they're usually animals, they grow, they reach adulthood, they reproduce, and then they die. But humans have evolved menopause,
Mm-hmm.
and we just don't see it in other primates. There are a few rare examples of chimps where you have a female chimp who maybe has lived up to 50, to the age of 50 or so, but that's really in captivity. And so we feel like there needs to be an explanation for this. And one of the explanations is what you mentioned, the grandmother hypothesis, that females that live past the age of or the reproductive age, they're really beneficial to have around because they're wise, they have a lot of information,
Mm-hmm.
they've perhaps themselves gone through several of their own offspring, not just one, but perhaps several, and so they can provide a lot of care. They can help in caring for offspring, and so this ties in again with this idea of living in social groups and the benefit of sociality. But in humans, it ties in really nicely because, like I mentioned earlier, humans, again, we're weird. We reproduce relatively quickly compared with our ape brethren. Um, we can have offspring every few years, whereas let's say orangs have offspring every 6 or 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we nurse our offspring. We do all the same things as other primates, but our offspring are very altricial, meaning that they require a lot of care. And so, how do we do this? How do we care for offspring that require so much of our attention, that literally cannot hang on by themselves? Um, that have this really long or extended period of growth and development, and don't reach sexual maturity until their teens. So how do you do this? How do you reproduce relatively quickly, still care for these offspring for extended periods of time, and do so successfully? Well, you have cooperative breeding. In some way, you have to have other individuals helping to care, meaning perhaps males, but also these grandparents.
Mm.
So that's really the kind of the crux of it is it because the grandmothers ties in with kin selection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are your grandmother and you're no longer reproducing yourself, you can certainly help not just your own genes get carried on in your offspring or half of them, right, through caring for your offspring, but caring for your offspring's offspring, which
Right.
is
That's
really
really where your fitness really comes into play, right? Is if your
exactly
children themselves reproduce.
right.
Um, so I
Yeah.
don't know if you
And
saw, but I went fishing. Jumped quite a bit, evolutionarily speaking, with that stick. Um, I'm gonna eat it now that we got back here, and it's making me quite sick. The game, something I've noticed is, as I've played for a few hours beyond this, it wants you to just keep eating things and making you sick, because that's how you become more omnivorous. You develop those neurons, right, as far as the game is concerned. But it seems to say that it's easier to digest fish than it is mammal meat.
huh,
I don't know if you knew anything about that.
I actually, I mean, that would make sense when you think about humans having an easier time sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I actually don't know that with regards to primates. That being said, there is this whole area within biological anthropology of people who are um, interested in the evolution of our diet and things of that nature, along with brain evolution, right? And how, let's say, the importance of these of fish of food that comes from water supplies, how important that might be in the evolution of our brain, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
of omega 3 and omega 6 fatty acids.
Yes.
And
I was just
so,
talking about in my video from last week on contemporary human biological variation, a study that was done on a population in India that had shown that they had a mutation that allowed for the increased bioavailability or the metabolic processing of omega 3 and 6 fatty acids from vegetal sources
interesting.
because they have such a deep history of vegetarianism
Huh.
is the argument
So,
before it. I believe that study done either 2010 or 2016 in Pune, India.
okay. Okay. Interesting. That is really, I will need to check that out.
Yeah, I just thought it was fascinating as the body desperately needs these fatty acids for brain health and development, right? So the fact that this is a population that has both for cultural reasons but also just scalar reasons in terms of the availability of protein, especially animal protein, for huge populations of people, that can be pretty scarce. All things
Right.
considered, and with again cultural elements of deciding to be vegetarian involved in there too. This random mutation, and I'm not sure the time depth on that mutation. I think that's interesting. I need to maybe go back to the original piece as well. But it's interesting that that would be something that would show up amongst that population because of those constraints specifically.
Yeah. No. So this is just a really fabulous example of natural selection in current times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every now and then, some of you students might see these articles like, "Is natural selection still evolving, or is it still occurring in modern humans?"
Mm-hmm.
And what we know of is yes, it is, and we have examples like lactose intolerance that I'm sure that you've learned about, or
Mm-hmm.
even something like sickle cell anemia. So we
Yep.
have
Classic examples.
relatively
We've done those.
right. So we have these relatively contemporary examples, along with I had another. Oh yeah, so high altitude adaptation is another one we would
Mm-hmm.
love to talk about. But this is another great example of how different populations are still undergoing natural selection.
All right, we've developed quite a few neurons here, so we're gonna, for the purpose of showing off a little bit of the game and some more of the systems of evolution, we're going to jump ahead a little bit. So we've done a ton of things and experienced much in our short lives as uh, Big Steve so far. For those who may have joined late, someone suggested that be the name for our lineage, and we missed that. But in honor, the given hominid we're playing has been deemed Big Steve. Um, so I'm just unlocking some more of these skills. In fact, we've gotten pretty far down bipedalism. In fact, to your point about chimps and gorillas being observed locomoting bipedally when they are carrying things, we're just now unlocking the ability to carry items with both hands for bigger or heavy things, which would it's in that same area of this evolutionary skill tree, so to speak, that all the bipedal skills are. Not with all the motor skills ones. It's actually kind of in the middle, which is interesting when you think about how all of these are actually placed relative to one another, and you're trying to think about the directions of these different things. But so as the game goes on, of course, we create new neural pathways. That's how our brain works when we learn things. We make these associations in our brains, and of course, the fact that we have to carry around children in the game pushes this that we're basically developing these neurons in our children as they're learning and watching and things. But every generation of a species, right, has its limits, and eventually we have to jump forward in time. So we have these two children that our clan started with, and while we were talking about human variation, genetics, and these things, I formed another couple with a female, and now I'm gonna ask her nicely to come and mate with me, so we can make another child. And this is where the magic happens, on our sleeping spot. Everyone be respectful. No doubt that was a very intimate and personal moment for them. But now that we... Oh, wait, are we related? That happens. No. Oh, that's the mother of those other children. So she can't have more than 2 offspring, according to the game. I think 2 is about average for chimps, at least, to have 2 that are both like really young at the same time, at least. What do you know about the
Right.
reproductive?
That makes a lot of sense. That there are two will not. It will be. I have not really seen. Not that it doesn't happen, but 2 dependent offspring is pretty max. So what happens is that again around age 3 or 4, one will become weaned, and often that weaning will take place when she's given birth to a new infant, right? Because that infant is then requiring more of the energy. But that young offspring, the one that's weaned, is still spending a lot of time close to the mama.
So you'll see that we've passed 5 days up at the top of the screen there. And so you can go basically real time if you want through here, but the kids won't ever age as far as I can tell. The only way that we can move forward into the next generation is by we're gonna try this process again. It's been a very busy day of making mates and reproducing, but the only way to jump forward, and you'll see again, I mentioned, I think the 2 little orange dots suggest that our offspring have beneficial genetic mutations. We have to wait until they're adults to see what those mutations are. So here, we're going to give birth.
So for any of the students who are watching, do any of you have any questions about what you're observing? And
yeah, we're happy to field questions in the chat. And they will chime in about 30 seconds. Hopefully someone's got some questions.
So this is really interesting. So this is not how it would occur among chimpanzees.
Yeah.
In the sense of, but this is really interesting because they are attempting to make them a little bit more human-like, right?
Mm-hmm.
This bond between both parents and offspring.
And that's not very chimp-like.
It's in chimps in particular. It's the bond is between the mother and offspring, and they often have no idea who the dad. At least from the perspective of the primatologist,
right.
They often don't know who the father is. because chimpanzees are very promiscuous.
Mm-hmm.
When a female comes into estrus, and that's the time when where she's receptive, where she can get pregnant. She is very appealing to a whole group of males, and she will mate with many of them. There are situations where she may just mate with one,
Mm-hmm.
and those are considered to be, they're called consort relationships, where maybe a male and a female will go off away from the group for a period of about a month, and have that consort relationship. But that's really when they spend time together with a member of the opposite sex. And so males tend to hang out with other males.
That's interesting. Um, so some of I assume that consort relationship has to do with like the decisions that both sexes have to make in terms of what makes them fit, right? In terms
Exactly.
of exclusivity or not, and how that can be ensured, or from the perspective of a female, how you do not necessarily want to have it known amongst all the males who the father is, right?
Right, right. Yeah, and so you're bringing up some really interesting questions, because this can function differently in different primate
Mm.
taxa, like different species.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, some of these explanations are, they're of course the human explanation for the behaviors that we're observing, right? So our explanation for this behavior is that in, in 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 chimpanzees, males are related to one another, but the females tend not to be related to one another, and they certainly benefit a lot by, the females meaning, benefit a lot by kind of having paternity uncertainty, where males don't know who that if that offspring might be theirs or not, because the argument is, if it reduces things like infanticide. So you
Mm-hmm.
tend not to see infanticide in chimps, but infanticide you do see in, let's say, gorillas, um, where the way that males and females interact it can be quite different. Where there's usually one male, an alpha male with a harem, right? One
Mm-hmm.
male with several females.
So let's do some evolving here. First thing we want to do is go into the next generation. So we want to see, we've got these three babies with positive mutations. So we're gonna lie down and check our evolution here. So what we do after a generation, the way the game wants you to play, is of course, you're unlocking these neurons as much as you can. I've actually run out, don't have enough of this energy to actually get that next one. But you get a certain number of reinforcements, and that has to do with the number of children you have, as well as if you find meteorites. Actually, like we did, you get some bonus reinforcements. And so, for example, if I want to lock this in, that takes all 5 of my reinforcements, because they're all nested together. And now once I've used all of them, I can change to the next generation. And it will lock those in, so when we start now, those will be unlocked. We never have to unlock them again. But the other ones I did not reinforce, our lineage will have to relearn.
Hmm.
And there's this lovely passing of the generational torch kind of cutscene.
So, so Grant Davis asked this a great question. He said, "Do we?" Basically, I think he's asking, how well do we know how hominids would behave on the
Mm-hmm.
spectrum between great apes and humans? I hear you guys using chimps, apes as the go-to for the species. So, you. Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah, so
Um,
we've jumped ahead.
yeah. So that's a great question,
Mm-hmm.
Grant. And and so one of the reasons, so you're getting at this idea of, how do we know what we know, right? Uh,
Yeah.
one one of the reasons that we study primates is to perhaps have a better understanding for our own behaviors, meaning, um, our behaviors and our anatomy and biology, all of those things didn't just arise out of nowhere. It's something that really we share many of these characteristics from our primate relatives and with these shared ancestors. So why we look at chimps and other great apes as a means for comparison is because those are the closest living relatives we have. And so we can say, wow, these are things that we do similarly, and these are things that we do differently. But if we do these, if there are certain behaviors that we engage in differently, do we have some idea of what our ancestors might have been doing? And how can we infer that, right? And so I mentioned a little bit earlier about chimpanzee sexual behavior, right? So mating behavior, and also gorilla group structure and mating behavior. We don't really know what our ancestors were doing with regards to that kind of a group dynamic, in part because we don't have enough fossil evidence. But I can give you one example here, and that is when you look at something like body size, and that would be in terms of just overall body size, but also sexual dimorphism. And that means the difference in size between males and females. If you have a species like gorillas, where males are a lot larger than females, you can expect that there's a lot of competition amongst males for reproductive access to females. And that is something that you see in different primate species, where if males are really much larger, again, there's a lot of sexual dimorphism, and that they have very large canines relative to females, that the males are fighting one another a lot more, or there are these aggressive interactions, and so that can at least narrow down in some sense by looking at other primate groups what you might expect for their mating structure. In chimpanzees are a little bit more similar to humans in terms of their sexual dimorphism, where males are maybe 10 to 12% larger than females, and they have this more promiscuous mating structure. Um, and some bonobos are similar, except that bonobos are a bit more matriarchal, and they don't females tend to be a little bit more dominant in the groups in bonobos. However, there's this overall promiscuity. Humans, again, we actually are not very sexually dimorphic. Males are maybe on average 10% larger than females. And so then that begs the question, what does that tell us about what our mating structure might have been like in the past? Because when we look at fossils, some of our ancestors we think were relatively dimorphic, like the Australopithecines.
Hmm.
But then that dimorphism reduced over time. And we think part of that reduction in sexual dimorphism maybe was linked to a change in mating structure, right? Sort of maybe a move towards a greater degree of monogamy. But again, one of the really fascinating things about humans is that we're weird, and that even though many human cultures are monogamous,
Hmm.
we're not always monogamous, right? There's probably people engage in promiscuity. There's what's called serial monogamy. Um, there are there's polygyny, where you have, let's say, one male with several wives.
Yeah, we'll be talking about a lot of these in terms of marriage practices later on this semester in Unit 3. Just to
Right,
go
right.
ahead.
And so then thinking about that, thinking about, well, why do these different kinds of um, mating structures work? Like, how do they function? Because we're primates, but we somehow these different kinds of structures function, um, have evolved to function in these different societies, right?
Hmm.
And so even though we may have some judgments about them, if they're different from our own or what we think they should be, they function.
Yeah.
So anyway, great question, Grant. That's just one example of what we can perhaps
Yeah.
extrapolate.
And that's especially true for this species. This species, as far as the game is concerned, it doesn't even have a name, right? So
Right.
we're talking about a species that existed relatively close in time or contemporaneous to the split between chimps and humans, probably, or the human lineage, right? So in terms of the comparisons, this species is going to be very similar. Um, Whereas some of these later species that we're about to jump to, which is not as far. I'm hoping that I've set us up that we can actually jump ahead quite a bit. But I'm going to show you guys what evolution looks like according to this game. And we'll see how far into the future from now, I guess, 10 million years ago, give or take, we have progressed through all of my explorations, animal fight creating excursions, and random tool making I've kind of been doing in the background here. So as you evolve, you unlock things that are evolutionary feats. And that's how it determines how far ahead. So we are currently at 9,999,984 years ago. And we're going to see how far we can jump in time. This will basically be like a generational jump, except we'll start with a brand new clan. And we will start somewhere else on this map, probably. And we'll see. And so the timeline starts ticking, and it tells us that we did this. We assembled nutrients from the vegetal food, which adds like about 25,000 years. We discovered a place, it adds about 25,000 years, and so on and so forth. And it just goes through all of these activities. And occasionally, I hope that we will see one up here where it says that we are ahead of science, which, again, you know, to this conversation of how we know what we know, it's hard to say that we can really accurately estimate how any of these events would relate at the scale of just a couple thousand years, right? We're talking on the order of millions of years. Something saying, well, this adds 25,000 years to evolution is kind of laughable. I think it's a fine and entertaining conceit as far as the game is concerned in terms of gamifying evolution, but the specificity of it is pretty amusing. There, we were about 10,000 years ahead there. Another time that we're moving faster than evolution. So we've moved a couple 100,000 years already without having done that much. And my understanding, I don't think this is a spoiler per se, but the game goes right up to the dawn of the Homo genus, I think is as far as the game goes. So you will get into the Australopithecines a little bit.
So Dr. Richardson, how far have you gone? How far have you
Well,
gone?
we're gonna go and find out after this evolution is done. We're gonna jump out of this file and we're gonna go into the one that I've been playing a little bit, and we will see. I'm somewhere around 7.8 million years ago now, and so you see we jumped about 400,000 years in that amount of time. So we haven't actually progressed to a new species. There are thresholds that the game has that are based on, of course, actual science, based on when we've dated these different fossil species, their range based on the total number of finds. And so there's cutoff points, and you can make all of the new neuronal connections that you want as you're going through, but until you hit those thresholds, you actually won't be an additional species. So we're a new clan and a new settlement somewhere else in the world. Before we jump to the file, we can just go look at this beautiful jungle out here. So you can see it's actually quite a large map in this game, and it's all connected. So we're a little out of the thickest of the jungle. You can kind of see that it starts to open up compared to what it was where we were before. So we're a little further out. But let's go to the title screen here, and we will jump in a few million years ahead.
So are you able to play then with different characters, essentially?
As you continually progress, you just go through a locked-in series of species. Is how that works. So, I mean, to an extent, you can jump between any individuals in your clan, and play as any of them, except for the babies. But here we are. I'll have to look at evolution. But you see, we're not that different. This is Sahelanthropus chidensis, officially, according to the game. I'm fully bipedal, which is pretty cool. I have also gotten my clan here. We're still working on making tools, but they've got, I got them to carry around branches and rocks, the occasional stick. If I give them a stick, they know how to use it. I went on a little excursion Last night is the last thing I did, and I had my whole clan with me. I was going on a big adventure because I can ask them to all come. Now you see all those connections there on the bar. So now we're going on a troop adventure. I can even kind of run a little bit now. Right, you'll see they're all following me. And so I was working my way. I saw a giant snake down somewhere, and I was going to go and scare it off because they can mimic me. Well, I can't. It's all contextual, so I can't intimidate nothing. I have to be around a predator. But I was going to intimidate the snake with everyone, and I thought this was going to be a sure thing. Little did I know that my entire clan was being stalked by a lion, a saber-toothed lion. I forget what the name of this species was exactly. But that proved to be no problem, because this entire horde of Sahelanthropus chidensis just beat the snot out of that cat with all of these sticks. And in fact, I guess this guy here has grabbed a bone from that predator that we killed. Oh, no, don't inspect that. That's just a rock. I forget which thing is in my left hand, which thing is in my right hand. It's very interesting to play from just a gaming perspective, a survival game where you don't have an inventory. You have your two hands, and that is all. You cannot, like, store things whatsoever. You just have to bring it back to your settlement, right? You can make piles. So I'm going to put these things down. I found some cool things. This is all my cool stuff, everyone, that I found. I've got a pile of rocks. Over here are some precious stones that I've found in caves and around, and they make me feel good when I carry them around. They keep me from losing as much dopamine, and they make me a little braver when there's predators around. I've said this to classes before. I don't know if I've said it in any of the videos this semester, but if there's one true human universal that I've determined, it's that humans like shiny things, and this game attests that that started early.
This is great.
So we've got all these tools and the like, and so what we're gonna do is I've spent some time doing activities to try to push the evolution, and I think I'm close enough that we can jump to the next species from here. So we're gonna do that together, and then see what that looks like. So I'm gonna end this expedition. You'll see. So if I want to pass on preferential mutations to future generations, you have to do that only as they're adults or elders. You'll notice I didn't make a point of this, but there are some. You can see that the one that I'm walking around as is got a much darker coat than some of the other ones. There are elders, and they have gray hair, so you can determine who they are. And again, speaks to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier with the grandmother hypothesis. There's reasons why both elder males and elder females still have a lot of evolutionary fitness. It's in different ways, of course, but you know, they don't outlive their usefulness as soon as they've reproduced by any stretch of the imagination. So your clan is made up of all these folks, and so I'm all nicely set up as far as the game is concerned to do another evolutionary leap. So we're gonna see. This is where we're at. A lot of development compared to where we started just a little bit ago. And so yeah, about 7.8 million years ago, and let's see where we end up based on what I've done. Hopefully it'll be enough. I think we need around 200,000 years.
So again, I think you and I had talked about this, and I'm sure you perhaps talked about this with the class. But one of the things that's really interesting and challenging in paleoanthropology is that, you know, we can only say for sure what we know based on the things that we can find, and then there's a fair amount of inference as well. But when you're thinking about or talking about things like tools, the only tools that we really know that our ancestors were using were the ones that were clearly manipulated.
Right.
So
the stones that we can see,
like sticks and other objects that they most, in all likelihood, manipulated to some degree, or maybe even made nests, or could have done all sorts of things with. We just have no evidence for because they didn't fossilize.
Right.
So I think it's just a really interesting thing to think about and to always keep in the back of one's mind, but that this game is clearly bringing out in a really nice way.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's something that, is particularly true of paleoanthropology, but is still very true of archaeology as well. Even, the periods of time I study in the scales of time that we're playing with in this game are laughably short. I look at mostly the last 2,000 to 4,000 years in eastern North America. And on the coast where I do a lot of research, where we're lucky because shell preserves particularly well. But what's really interesting, as a little aside, on the Georgia coast where I do work, is we don't find as many shell tools as we think we should, compared to other places like the Gulf Coast of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. You find many more clearly manipulated stone tool or shell tools that were things like chisels, scrapers, axes, hammers. These conchs and the like are really can be manipulated to make very good tools, a lot of different tools, because of how hard that shell is and how dense it is in some of these species. For the Georgia coast, we have to assume that some of the things that other coastal populations were doing with shell tools, they were using tools that did not preserve, more wood and other things to do some of these basic scraping and other tasks, or they were not making the same kinds of objects with those tools to begin with. It's not that they are without these stone tools or these shell tools entirely, but they're really fewer of them than we would expect to have generally. And so you have to deal with these, what you think you know about preservation context, and the word that Dr. Jelinek used earlier, taphonomy, right? The sorts of things that happen in the ground after things are deposited that can affect whether they show up or not. I think something I did mention in terms of the fossils to the class was how only certain environments actually are amenable to the creation of fossils. So our window into species is kind of limited to certain environments as well as happenstance.
Absolutely. I mean, even just thinking about the continent of Africa, which is where we know we've evolved from. I mean, think of these enormous swaths of land that we just don't have access to, because if there are fossils, they are deep under rainforest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they are, under a desert, in a desert that covered by sand. So we just don't have easy access to them.
So I do not think we are a new species. I was a little off. But interestingly enough, we are back at the actual settlement. It randomly chooses, and we are back at the very original settlement that we were just playing and that the game starts in about 2 million years later.
So this looks like a female at this point?
Yes, I am a female. You, an adult single female. And so there's no difference as far as the game is concerned in your capacities whatsoever. Everything a male can do, a female can do. There are slight differences between elders and adults in terms of the total amount of energy that they have in a day to do things. I can make all the tools, I can lead my clan, and so I find that interesting. I think it makes a lot of sense from a gameplay perspective. But what are the roles of gender and sex in like primate social groups? We've talked a lot about reproduction in that extent, but in terms of social roles and things, the aside you had about the female chimps hunting the bush babies is just absolutely fascinating. I was wondering if you had any other fun tidbits.
I mean, definitely there isn't, we don't see the division of labor the way that we do in modern human societies, nor do we, nor from what we might expect to see in past societies. But again, I mean, the sort of the roles that they're relegated to are rather straightforward regarding reproduction. So females tend to be the ones that reproduce and take care of the offspring. And the other thing I think that's really interesting is that, especially in primates, higher primates like apes, we're learning is such a really important part of their growth and development, is that they're spending a lot of time observing the other individuals, right? So in chimps, they're spending a lot of time observing their mother. And so chimpanzees tend to learn how to do things like termite fish and antfish from their mom, right? But if they're male and they later engage in hunting, that's something that they then learn as a young adult, when they are hanging around all the other males at that time. And I guess getting back to maybe those more male specific behaviors, like, and I'm talking about chimpanzees that patrol. That's a very male specific behavior. um, the females do not go out on patrols
Yeah.
and really go after other chimps, nor do they hunt in the same way that the males do. Their hunting is, again, more relegated to fashioning. And this is one specific group that does this, where they fashion sticks and hunt for bush babies.
Yeah, that's cultural knowledge for that group.
Exactly.
Which is fascinating.
So yeah, cultural knowledge, and that you bring up this really interesting point regarding culture and cultural knowledge and how information gets transferred from one member to the next. But I do like that this particular game is, they're not committed to saying, oh, it's the males are the dominant individuals. It could easily be the females that are just doing the same things and could easily be leading the group as well. Because the fact is they could have.
So as far as sociality goes, we're going to see what we can do to get everyone on the same page here and try to make some tools together. We still, the game doesn't have this in place, but there's no real language. What we have is a call system, and if you all heard that, and we have mimicry. We can ask them to basically do what I do. So let's say we want to make some sharpened sticks if we're going to go out and we want to be well protected from predators and the like. I grab a stick, and I can order everyone to also grab a stick. And now because I tell them a mimicry call or something, and they find sticks. They're all going to walk around and see them getting tree branches, all these places. I can swap the hands to the other side and order them or ask them to do that too. So they're all holding it in their other hand. And there's a limited set of rocks, so maybe not everyone's going to be able to do this, but I can now come over here, grab a rock, it's pretty repetitive, and then ask them to all grab rocks. So hopefully they're going to come over here, at least the ones who can grab rocks, they're going to grab them. And then we're going to try to alter this stick. And it just involves some whacking on it, as you saw earlier. There's 3 types of tools or stones you can use in tools in this game. You have granite, basalt, and obsidian. And stone tools are interesting in general. I know more about stone tools from, of course, much later in time than the early stone tools. But generally speaking, there's a lot of knowledge that goes into stone tools. It isn't quite so simple as whacking rocks together. Different stones have different hardnesses, right? And depending on which stone you are actually striking and which stone you are striking with, and the relative hardness of those stones, you're going to get different results. And the real trick to effective stone tool production is being able to predict. So let's see, I ask them to mimic that, but that might be a little much for them. Yeah, it doesn't look like anyone thought that was a good idea to copy. But there's certain stones, like this is granite, so that I was using to make that this sharpened stick, and that's really great as far as stone because it's pretty hard. It's not as hard as basalt, which is something you can find elsewhere in the game, but it is a lot harder than obsidian, which we have over here. Obsidian is a volcanic glass, and so while granite is pretty hard and has a pretty heterogeneous internal structure, obsidian instead is what we would call cryptocrystalline, because it's basically a volcanic glass. And so because of its internal crystalline lattice, it breaks in predictable ways. You spend enough time whacking obsidian or other similar cryptocrystalline stones like chert or flint, which a lot of stone tools that people might, if they've ever walked a field or gone to an American History Museum, those are the sorts of stone tools that we see in the archaeological record a lot of the time. But all of these stones that fracture predictably, you spend a lot of time banging them together, and you can get a sense for that, right? And so you know how and where to strike stone tools in a predictable way to get the results you want. So I can use this harder stone of granite to whack this obsidian, and trust me, it's a lot harder. I've tried flint knapping a couple times in my life, and it's very difficult, and I have ended up bleeding several times from it because any of these cryptocrystalline stones, they fracture, when I say in a predictable way, they fracture in what is known as conchoidal patterns, right? So they're basically cone-shaped depending on where the force actually impacts the stone. I don't know how many people in here played with BB guns as a kid, or maybe got in trouble with BB guns, but if you, say, shoot a glass window with a BB gun, not condoning that, but if it's ever happened, hopefully I'm not alone in the chat and having done this as a kid and gotten yelled at for it. It actually pops out where you hit it in this perfect little cone because glass is again cryptocrystalline, so it's a conchoidal because it's a cone, right? So you hit the glass on one side and then it pops out a little cone, and that's exactly what's going on in these stone tools. And when that cone pops out, depending on the angle and the force and the actual internal structure of that stone, you end up with very, very sharp edges as that energy wave propagates through the material and splits it in two. And obsidian, because it is glass-like, it is known to be one of the sharpest possible of those stones. In fact, flaked obsidian is sharper than surgical steel. And there is at least a small following of optical surgeons, eye surgeons out there that get scalpels made with obsidian from flint knappers to use in eye surgery because of the thinness of the cutting edge. It is you cannot match it with modern industrial techniques. And so as we're making tools in this game, the actual tools that you produce have something to do with the nature of the characteristics of those stones. And so granite, because it's hard but not that hard, if you break it with either more granite or a harder stone like basalt, you'll make a grinder, right? So you have a much rough surface that you can then use as an abrasive to grind things into paste. Or it would have had all sorts of uses in the past besides that, but in the game you can make pastes. The basalt, if you whack basalt, which is very hard, with another basalt, you will end up with a chopper. And this isn't actually too far from what we were talking about in terms of Oldowan tools. These relatively quickly made stone tools, they still show quite a bit of pre-planning relative to anything else that had been on this, that we see in the lineage prior to that. But generally, they were probably pretty crude implements for scraping and chopping. And that's very true for the Acheulean hand axes, which came later. Right, those were big choppers, probably to help break open bones for marrow. That's one theory. I don't know if you want to speak to some of these potential uses of these tools. But to finish, Petra. But to finish up, the obsidian is used for scraping because of how sharp it is. Right, so it's good for butchery, getting flesh off of bone, or other things like that. I don't know what you might want to add to early tool use specifically amongst hominids and hominins. I think that some context would be good there. If you have some.
No, I mean, I love that you're sharing the idea that eye surgeons are using obsidian. I remember when I learned that, I just thought it was absolutely fascinating. And obsidian is sort of this really sort of a magical tool because of its sharpness, and that blade is definitely excellent for basically for taking off the hide, for basically butchering. One of the things that there are so many things that are interesting about tools. It's not. I just want to say one caveat that this is not something that's a focus of what I study, but I do know a little bit about it. Is that like the Acheulean tools, those very large tools that Homo erectus made? Is that one that those are all very. The large choppers are all very similar to one another.
Yes.
And so there's some interesting ideas regarding whether or not there was some sort of an innate component to it, like this got hard. The making of this kind of tool somehow got hard.
Yes, because especially these early tool types, the Oldowan tools and the Acheulean tools, they show up and they're very similar for a very long span of time.
Right. And so to me, I'm a little skeptical of it, but at the same time, it does beg the question of how can this be? How can these tools be so similar for such an extended period? Because one of the hallmarks of humans is that we're really good at innovating, right? And
Yeah.
even if you're not that good at innovating, mistakes are made all the time. And so, especially when you're talking about something like a stone tool, which, as you mentioned, it just takes a really long time to learn how to make a stone tool properly. Even the
Yes.
most basic ones, like the Odawan tools. I mean, it and when they try to teach adults how to make a stone tool, it's not that it takes days or weeks. I mean, it takes years to become even relatively accomplished at that
Absolutely.
task.
Speaking from the limited experience I have, that yes, I know some really immensely skillful flint knappers, and they've been doing it for years, if not decades, of their life.
Hmm.
And it really does take that much skill to produce anything that is even remotely like comparable to the artifacts that you would see in a museum or anything that was even being produced by our evolutionary ancestors. It's
Yeah,
really quite difficult. Getting a sharp edge, right, is not hard, but getting one where you want it, the size you want it, the shape you want it to do a particular task is very difficult.
right, right. And I think the other thing that's, you asked if I had any sort of non-human example.
Hmm.
There are some interesting primate examples where there's a particular species of capuchin. Is
Hmm.
it sapajous? And capuchins are South American primates, and they live in Central and South America. And so again, they're pretty distantly related to the primates that you find in Africa and Asia. They diverged probably around 35 or 40 million years ago. That being said, capuchins are really smart, and this particular species, they make stone tools, and so I wouldn't say make stone tools. They use stone tools.
Yeah.
So they use hammer and anvil stones in order to break open large nuts. So again, they're not really making these tools, but they're using the
Using
kinds
them.
of tools
Yes.
that they would naturally find. And so that's just another important thing to consider is the kind of innovations that our ancestors were probably doing, that they were likely using things that already existed, because we know that chimpanzees do that. They do use hammer and anvil stone, some groups, to break open nuts, but those aren't manipulated. They just find the ideal size shape.
Hmm.
Um, but our ancestors, like the ones that you can see here in the video, were actively manipulating these stone objects to, for specific tasks, which ultimately, when you think about it intellectually, just really amazing.
Yeah.
Kind of a really amazing movement.
What I did in that last one is something I'd known I could do, but had not actually gotten around to doing it before. So this 2 million years later on this species, I'm discovering that I can strip the leaves off of that plant for the first time. Yeah, the game is remarkably freeform in how it wants you to move forward in time and learn things. The tutorial messages I've been getting rid of largely to not overly break immersion for the viewers. They help. They're absolutely helpful, but they stop pretty quick in the grand scheme of things, and you're left to figure everything out, which speaks to what we were talking about in terms of like the amount of practice and trial and error that is represented in human evolution, both in terms of just the our biology as well as our culture and material culture. Right, we are at the current end, but part of an ongoing trajectory of evolution that's been going on for 65 million years. Right, and
Yeah.
that's something that I find fascinating and more than a little humbling. It gives me some perspective that is helpful these days, um, to a certain degree, to just think about how current events kind of fit into this broader history of evolution and development and cultural change. Which we'll be talking coming up in some of this week's videos in the next 2 weeks about kind of what happened when the developments of, smacking two rocks together like this really went more or less exponential, right?
Right.
Um, because
So
change started happening much faster. Uh, at once we get to the latter stages of the Homo genus, right? In fact, the Homo genus, in and of itself, in some respects, is a representation of exponential, like evolutionary change in things like cranial capacity, our spread in terms of different habitats, and all sorts of things.
yeah. So Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
I actually need to go.
Okay.
Um,
I was getting a little hungry myself. I don't want to disappoint too many folks in here, but I think I'm about at the end myself. So I would encourage anyone in this class that is interested in games to really give this a try. I've played it for about the last week to prepare for this because I had wanted to do this as well, and I found it really, really engaging. Um, it certainly should not be taken as a authoritative source on human evolution and development, but it's a fantastic imagining of it, and the soundtrack is amazing. Just throwing that out there. I don't know how much you guys have heard in the background, but it's really great. I'm
and
now following it on Spotify.
and I imagine, I mean, there's virtually anything that you see in this game. You could Google it or do a search through the
Yes,
library, and
absolutely.
you'll likely be able to find some article that speaks to some aspect of that behavior, right?
Yes,
Which I think
absolutely.
that's what's to me. I'm not a big gamer, but to me, that's what's really quite remarkable about
Yeah,
this particular game.
and you can, of course, reach out to myself or Dr. Jelinek if you are interested in having some clarification on some of
Absolutely.
these things. We could point you in the right direction. And I should point out, are there any classes that if they've found this human evolution section of the course and this stream to be interesting, that they should pay attention to in the
Oh,
future?
absolutely. Great question. So there's biological anthropology, Anthropology 240, which will go into a little bit, well, much more in depth into effectively what you're going to be talking about in the next maybe 3 weeks. So this
A
current
little less.
stream,
We've actually ended kind of with contemporary human biological variability and
okay,
are moving into more archaeology. So it's about the
okay,
stuff we've generally covered thus far, except in much more detail. What I have given
okay,
2 weeks gets an entire semester in
right.
biological anthropology.
And then there's a course called it's Anthropology 243 called Sociality of the Great Apes. And so, it'll touch a little bit on ape evolution, but it will more look at some of the social interactions, which of course is really interesting because um, some of the apes do things that are quite similar to us, but looking at environmental pressures and sort of the ecology and how that affects behavior is that's a really neat course. There are some more advanced courses that will get into this material, like and I can't think of the number, but there are some 300 and 400 level courses that look at human origins, and
Hmm.
those are really worth taking, especially if you're interested in anatomy and aspects of skeletal biology, but also human evolution specifically. So I think that those are worth looking at.
That's great.
But so, Dr. Richardson, thank
Yes.
you so much for inviting me.
Oh my gosh, thank you
And
so much for joining me here.
and
This is incredibly valuable while I was just wandering around, fooling around with this monkey. You've been providing just fantastic information and context for all of this, so thank you so much.
oh no, absolutely, this was great. This was great fun. And thanks to all of you. I wish that we could see your faces, but I
That's the story
appreciate
of this
all of you
semester, right?
who typed in. Yes, yes, that is our semester. So again, take care and feel free to reach out if you want.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much
All right.
for joining, and I'll talk to you soon, Petra, because we've got more scheming to do for future Intro to Anthropology stuff in the coming
We,
weeks.
we do. We do. All right.
All
Take
right,
care.
take care. And everyone, thank you all for tuning in, those of you who did. I hope you found this entertaining. We're going to do this again in a couple weeks with another game that I think has some contextual value to anthropology. It's called Dawn of Man, which I haven't sat down and played much, so maybe I'll eat my hat on those words and we'll see how it works. But in terms of as we get into content about the rise of cultural complexity, Dawn of Man picks up kind of where this game leaves off after a bit of a pause with early anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens probably, and early cultural development in terms of sedentism primarily, and starting there as probably hunter-gatherers in trying to develop more complex societies with larger numbers of people and increases in technology and the like. And while I've enjoyed this little adventure for myself into survival games through this game, I am a much bigger fan of city building games, strategy and tactical games, and so Dawn of Man promises to deliver in that genre. So I think that'll be a lot of fun, and I will make announcements about that in the coming weeks. Before I let you go, though, I'm going to see if I can't do something exciting with this sharpened stick. I'm sure some of you have been waiting with bated breath for that. See if I can protect myself from one of these predators. Or maybe I'll just get this warthog and this mamba to like fight again, because I've been having a lot of success at that. Look, they're just going to walk into each other. Oh, I've been found. This time I want to be found. Come at me, warthog. Oh, he's gonna go after one of my friends. Oh, did you scare him off? He did. Wow. Good job, clanmate. Who even needs a sharpened stick when you just have a whole branch? Well, maybe I'll fight this snake. I feel like I owe someone in the chat who is here some hominid animal fighting. We've just watched warthogs and alligators fight things. In reality, it took quite a bit of time before my species was competent enough to protect itself. Alright, come at me, snake. Oh, he's just gonna go after my friend, naturally. And now he's been snake. Let's just get out of here. Get out of here, snake. And now, so he's poisoned. Or is he protected? He looks alright. Alright, well, I'm quite hungry, so unfortunately I promise you animal fights. And unless I can find... There's just this running away snake over here. Normally I would be very pleased with the lack of predators around, because then I could explore kind of without fear, but just gonna have to leave you with this. So, with that, folks, it's been a pleasure, and so hopefully we do this again. If you enjoyed it or you have any suggestions, I'll work on some of the audio issues in the future. But let me know what you thought. So I hope you enjoy the rest of this week's content, and I'll be in touch later this week with an update telling you about some of the stuff that's coming up, because as I mentioned in these emails, we've got the Unit 2 project coming up next week, and that's going to be a bit of a departure, but hopefully a fun one from the way we've been doing class thus far. So stay tuned. And with that, take care, everybody.